The fire is nice and warm. The flames are up. They are rising. But look, great to see both of you. Jessica, can I start first with you? Because look, how exactly are open banking enabled payments changing the game? And where are we on that road towards mainstream adoption? I like to give people really easy opening questions.
Happy to. And I agree. Open banking is changing the game. I think it will enable us to make payments simpler, smarter, and safer. For customers, it will give a better customer experience. For merchants, I think we can make the cost cheaper and reduce fraud. And I think for payments providers, we can grow the pie while still giving customers a better experience. But your point about, where are we on this journey? There's been a lot of talk about the exponential growth in open banking payments, and that is absolutely true. So I think in 2020 there were 5 million payments, whereas in the first month of this year alone there were 3.5 million. So you can see the growth, but you've got to put that in the context of 36 billion payments in the UK annually. So it's still very small. And in terms of the tipping point to mainstream adoption, I would say, actually I would draw on an analogy or a comparison with contactless card payments. They started in 2007 and really started very slowly, but didn't reach the tipping point till Transport for London enabled them on their system. And at that point, they took off, and they now make up a quarter of the payments, of those 36 billion payments in the UK. Now, where are we on that journey? We're at the very start of that journey. I think variable recurring payments, I think request to pay, and the move to open finance will be that tipping point, but we are not yet there yet. But it's all to come. Okay, everything starts from small beginnings. but Sarah, come into the conversation, because from your perspective, how do you think open banking payments are going to really change the experience, transform the experience for retail customers? What can we expect?
Yeah, well, first off, for the retail customer, there are now open banking-based solutions out there available for use. So instead of typing in your card details, you put in your banking credentials and the money move out of your account directly to the merchant. So they're already reality. If you go to Amazon in Europe, you will see a whole host of payment opportunities there, some of which are open banking-based. And that's definitely a trend that I think we'll see continue until at some point we'll need to see some consolidation because it really becomes too much. I think what might be notable is that some of these open banking solutions actually have the potential to replace cash where we haven't seen cash replaced yet, just because they're often easier to adopt for micro merchants. So a card-based infrastructure, a little bit more heavy to implement. If you go with open banking, then that can be easier. Think your mobile coffee shop. To give you a concrete example, a few weeks ago, I was at the spring show at my daughter's gymnastics club, and I no longer pay cash at the cake sale. I pay with a mobile payment app, which the club has installed, and that's some of what open banking makes possible.
Okay, so that's the benefits for the customer. You touched on this briefly, but Jessica, what about the merchant?
The merchant, yes. I think there are a lot of opportunities, and actually NatWest feels it's very innovative in this space. In fact, I think we've done £1.5 billion worth of open banking payments, and we've launched a couple of firsts, so maybe I'll use those to bring it to life. So the first example I would mention is Pay It, which is, I'd like to add in, multi-award winning. But what it does, it's an alternative to cards and run over faster payment rails using open banking and APIs. And it's initiated by a QR code that then sends you to your bank to authorize. And as I said, for customers, it's frictionless, and for merchants, it's cheaper and reduces fraud. So that's one example. I think other examples, actually, we've done something called Send Money, which is actually an alternative to something like putting a check in the post. So this, you can send money, again, using open banking to a recipient without actually knowing their bank account details. And the great thing about this is the customer experience, the NPS scores are incredibly high at 75, and I think over 3/4 of people thought that this experience was excellent. So it has a lot of potential rather than receiving a check in the post, for example. The third example, and we may touch on it later, but is variable recurring payments. Again, we partnered with TrueLayer at the start of this year, and this is a solution where a TPP can authorize a series of payments that over at different points and at different amounts, rather with one authentication. So again, an alternative to direct debits, for example.
I've forgotten what a check looks like,
Yes,
by the way. They seem a little bit obsolete. But I mean, Sarah, look, we're hearing about all these different innovations. They're going to make the payment system easier for consumer and for merchants. But what does it do to existing payments value chains?
Well, most obviously, we're seeing new players replacing the card schemes at a particular place in the value scheme or in the value chain. So we have open banking aggregators aggregating access to many banks' APIs in one place. We have providers of new alternative payment methods using those open banking aggregators to provide the payment methods. I think we'll see that open banking aggregators themselves will increasingly go after payments licenses to be able to take on that place in the value chain. And we're even seeing aggregators of alternative payment methods. So we're seeing companies like PPRO who aggregate several alternative payment methods to make it easier for PSPs and merchants to sell across many geographies with only one integration point. So really building new places.
That's what you touched on originally, that you've got these different payment mechanisms, but it's cluttering the space.
A little bit, yeah, and making it very hard as well for merchants and PSPs because you need different solutions in different geographies, right? On the back of that, not surprisingly, we're seeing that the schemes are acquiring some of these open banking players. So you're seeing Visa bought Tink, MasterCard bought Aya. Perhaps more interestingly, Visa attempted to acquire Plaid, but the US Department of Justice intervened, stating that Visa was basically eliminating competition that would be to the benefit of the consumer and the merchant. So that's a very interesting play.
Okay, I mean, Jessica, let's focus on overlay services for a moment. Why do you think request to pay is such an important step, a game changer? And what are the benefits?
Request to pay is an interesting one, and I think, as I touched on, it could be an alternative to direct debit, for example. So at the moment, I think there are 4.5 billion direct debits made in the UK. 90% of adults use them, and actually for most people, they're simple, and you actually don't have to think about it. But the world is changing, and the cost of living is going up due to global crises, but also we have the gig economy is coming in, and I've seen figures where ranging from 1 million to 6 million people are working in this gig economy, and the income is variable, and so having more control over your money can only be a good thing. Sure. And so what request to pay does is, rather than just taking a direct debit out, for example, and you know it's coming, but it just goes out, it will send you a message. So for example, your utility company would send you a message, request to pay, and you could, depending on what they decide, you could have a number of options: pay now, pay in a couple of days, or pay half now, or call your utility company. And what it does is
a chance to rearrange your finances, basically.
Exactly. It gives people more control, and I think in the world that we live in, that has to be a good thing.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned the utility example as well, because we need more control given a nasty surprise that's going to land on our doorsteps next month. But I mean, Sarah, come back into the conversation, because look, we are looking at this largely from the UK experience, but what about payments beyond our parameters? Can we see open payments actually unlocking Europe-wide interoperability?
That is a very good question.
I'm glad you got that question.
In theory, perhaps. I think in practice, open banking, open payments would have obstacles, and a lot of obstacles to overcome. So open banking still operates on the domestic schemes. So to cross borders, you still need to move between domestic schemes. That's possible. I mean, we help our clients do that, others do that. But to make this work, you also have to connect to all of the banks out there. And even with open banking aggregators in the space, that is just a daunting thing to achieve. And you have to think that not all countries are as mature as the UK in terms of open banking. So you will not see the same success rate everywhere from open banking payments. open banking payments have the sort of fundamental problem that you initiated, and then you don't know whether it's actually going to happen until the money lands on your account. So I think, to be honest, there are just a lot of obstacles to that, and I'd actually maybe put my money on request to pay, beating open banking to that finish line, I think, because there are some of those problems solved through those.
It's called a safe hedge, really, isn't it? This is a question to both of you. Jessica, you tackle it first, and I'll move it on to Sarah, because look, we know that this world of payments is changing. Obviously, you know, the world's becoming more digitized, and it throws up more questions. But at the end of the day, how can the industry ensure that customers are protected? We heard about the importance of keeping the customer on board, trust and all that sort of stuff. But what is it that the banks themselves should be doing? Because this is one of those games where if you lose your customers, that market is so big, we can always take our business elsewhere.
This is a big question, and I'm sure you could have a whole session on it. Customers and customer protection is paramount. So just taking fraud as an example, I think the industry, not the customers, but the industry loses £1 billion to fraud every year. It actually stops
That's reported fraud.
Yeah, and it stops 1.6 billion. So the industry is already doing a huge amount, and it has a lot of policies, procedures, but it also implements initiatives and infrastructure such as confirmation of payee to really try and help customers, protect customers. But this is something that is not just industry, it's also regulators and the structure of the industry that we all need to work together on. So regulators, I know, are very focused on APP scams and that's the PSR, and also looking at consumer protections over faster payments as open banking picks up. And I think what we really need to do is work together as an industry and with regulators to understand as faster payments or open banking picks up, as we build the new payments architecture, as this new infrastructure gets built, how do we build consumer protections and protecting the customer into that? And I think this will be an ongoing and ever-growing issue, because the fraudsters and the criminals are out there, and we need to protect customers.
Sarah?
I think I'd like to take a different angle to this one. I think
if you look at the card schemes, one of their big values is actually the rule books that they've built up over the years, their processes for dealing with chargebacks and disputes, etc. So it's an industry that solved that problem for themselves. And with open banking, it's true there's certainly a problem to solve, because when you make an account-to-account transaction, it's irrevocable. So, there is no going back. So you need a process for that. And I actually think that we'll find that some of the big players in open banking will start tackling that problem themselves. So I think that's one angle to it. Another interesting angle to the consumer protection is that if I just veer off a little bit into the sort of European context for a second, is that I actually think the difference between how this looks in different European countries will actually eventually define the evolution of open banking in different countries. So to give you a few examples, in Denmark we have a digital payment solution called Mobile Pay, which is actually a hybrid. It works on open banking rails, it also works on card rails. And where does it work on card rails? Well, the payments move through card rails when they happen in a shop, because then you immediately have the consumer protection built into the solution. When it's a peer-to-peer payment, it works on open banking rails. So that kind of a hybrid solution may well come into play to preserve the consumer protection. The two working together, the old and the new.
Yeah, under the same sort of interface, right? Depending where you use it, it's one or the other solution. If you go to Holland, you have something like Ideal, which in Holland is, I think almost 65% of e-commerce goes through Ideal. It is a very old solution, built by the banks, works well, it has consumer protection. I think we'll see that open banking is going to have a hard time converting people from Ideal to open banking solutions in Holland. So really very different solution.
It's somebody else's problem, don't worry about it. But look, let's project into the future here. Jessica, if you could take this, and then we close out with Sarah. Because look, what are the further opportunities that are likely to be opened up by these payments once the whole thing is unlocked?
Well, as we said right at the start, this is just this is really just the beginning of the journey.
Scratching the surface.
Exactly. We will be able to make payments simpler, smarter, and safer. There's no question. But there is a long way to go. We have not got anywhere close to the tipping point, whether it's variable recurring payments, whether it's request to pay, or actually whether it's the move from open banking to open finance. And we haven't really touched on that yet. But that will open up a whole new raft of opportunities, whether it's mortgages or insurance. And the industry is only just working with regulators as well, but really focused on the governance for that. So this is a whole nother journey we have to go on.
But clearly you're psyched up for it, are you?
Yeah. I think there are actually two different answers depending where you look, corporate or consumer. I think in corporate, we haven't even seen this begin to play out, and there is so much opportunity. Most corporates are banked by many banks. They're not actually the biggest users of banking online solutions. They're much more loyal, use their finance solutions, their invoicing solutions much more, and those players are just waiting to increase their part of the value chain, and open banking really will be an opportunity to unlock that. So that's kind of what I think we haven't even seen it happen in the corporate space, and that's going to be very interesting. In the consumer space, I think I'd point to two things. The combination of what you can do with the payment initiation APIs and the account information service APIs, which we haven't seen so much play out yet, but think about the credit evaluations you can do with account information service, combining that with a payment solution for short-term credits, etc. And the other thing in the consumer space that I think is worth keeping an eye on is the tap to pay, because tap to pay seems to correlate quite highly. It's very widely used in countries that use iPhone. On the iPhone, the only tap-to-pay solution available from your lock screen at the moment is Apple Pay. The moment that potentially gets unlocked, so other providers can use the NFC, is the moment where open banking can really start to be tap-to-pay as well. So I think that's worth keeping an eye on.
It's all very head-spinning stuff, and it's only midday. Look, Sarah and Jessica, thank you so much for projecting into the future, giving us a sense of where we are now. But thank you.